Humans have long altered nature based on their needs. Considering how many people live on the planet and how much food we all need, it is not surprising that we are trying to grow food even in arid places on the planet. After all, it would seem what could be easier. You provide abundant watering and that's it. Harvest. It could be, but no. In addition to the fact that such farming requires a huge amount of fresh water which is already in short supply, the risk of mistakes is very high. The latter can be impossible to fix and may lead to environmental disasters. In recent times, there are already enough examples of the time such projects led to terrible consequences. So why could farming in the dry regions of the planet be a big mistake? Let's find out. What do you know about the Aral Sea and what does agriculture have to do with it? Why is its story called the worst environmental disaster of the 20th century? This tragedy can be traced back to the 1950s when the USSR decided to turn Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan into huge cotton plantations. This crop needs abundant watering. Thus, from the Amudarya and Siridarya rivers, they decided to dig a lot of reclamation canals. But the only trouble was that these two rivers were the only source of water inflow into the Aral Sea. At that time, it was the fourth largest lake in the world, which was called the sea for its high salinity and massive size. By the beginning of the 60s, water flowed through the canals. But due to the lack of waterproofing, more than half of the water went into the ground, not reaching the fields. The Aral Sea between 1961 to 1970 lost a third of its inflow and became shallower by 20 centimeters annually. In the 1970s, the situation worsened. In Uzbekistan, they were trying to curry favor with Moscow by promising unrealistic cotton harvests, 3 million tons a year, 4, 6. The area under crops was constantly expanding, and the excessive consumption of water exceeded all reasonable norms. The Aral Sea lost two-thirds of its inflow and became shallower by 60 centimeters per year. By 1980, water had been leaving the former ports of Aralsk and Moynak for tens of kilometers. Fish factories were closing, fishing fleets were lying on dry land, and hundreds of thousands of people were emigrating. Between the years 1981 to 1990, the inflow of water into the Aral Sea was 5% of the 1960 level. The sea became shallower by a meter per year until in 1989 when it divided into two big water bodies, the Big Aral Sea in Uzbekistan and the Small Aral Sea in Kazakhstan. Extreme salinity killed all fish. In 2004, the Big Aral was divided into two parts, eastern and western. By 2014, the eastern basin dried up completely and turned into the Arakum Desert. The wind carried the salts and pesticides that have accumulated on the bottom, slowly killing the remaining population. The Big Aral finally dried 10 years later. There was no chance of its recovery. There was no way to fix this mistake. Uzbekistan continued to use the waters of the Amudarya for agriculture and remains one of the largest importers of cotton in the world. Do you think the neighbors in the region learned a lesson from this story? We don't think so. At the junction of the 70s and 80s, the Saudi authorities decided to use the earned petrodollars to remove the country's dependence on food imports. Historically, agriculture in the country was developed in a limited area. There are no rivers and lakes in the country, and low rainfall and arid climate make it impossible to grow large crops. Desert agriculture requires water. Where can it be taken from? The main source was the Arabian Aquifer, water-saturated sediments occurring at a depth of 100 to 500 meters. The volume of water was huge, 500 billion cubic meters. Yes, it's a very slowly renewable resource, but it's bigger than Lake Erie in the US. As part of the project, the state built central irrigation systems, distributed land free of charge to those who needed it, provided interest-free loans, and promised to purchase finished products more expensive than the market. With one goal: to conquer arid lands, an agricultural boom began in the country. How much water will go away? No one thought about this. Up to 90% of the total water intake went to agriculture. For credit money, it was possible to drill a personal well with unlimited water. Most farms used classical irrigation instead of drip and rain, which led to even more water consumption. The results seemed to be successful. Where there used to be desert turned to green fields on satellite images. The country was fully self-sufficient in all products, from wheat to meat. In the early 90s, Saudi Arabia became one of the world's top wheat exporters. What was the price? It was shocking. For over 25 years, the Arabian aquifer had been depleted by more than 80%. At the end of the 2000s, Saudi Arabia admitted its mistake and was forced to abruptly switch to another model. Today, it is the world's largest buyer of land in other countries, exporting its crops. Agriculture in irrigated areas is drying. Scientists say it will be possible to draw water from the aquifer again in 50 years. The world has again become convinced that irrigation in arid regions is a dangerous idea and can lead to a disaster on a national scale. Will the lesson of Saudi Arabia help save the Colorado River Basin and water supplies in the western U.S.? Maybe. So far, however, the situation is not encouraging. The year 2022 has been a shocking year for Californians. No wonder, because the two main reservoirs of the region, Lakes Oroville and Shasta, have dried up by more than half. In 2021, for the first time in 50 years, a hydroelectric power plant had to be turned off there, as there was not enough water to power the turbines. But it's not just California that's suffering. All western states are on the verge of a water disaster. The symbol of the region, the Colorado River, has become shallow by 20%. The two largest U.S. reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, are less than a third full. The Colorado River on the U.S.-Mexico border has turned from a swampy delta into an arid desert. Behind the dam in Mexico flows a stream 5 meters wide, which, simply so to say, melts into the sand. Why is this happening? One could chalk it up to the worst mega drought in 1,200 years, which has been on for 23 years in the American West. Or blame everything on global warming, in which half of the planet still does not believe, including the United States. But scientists are unanimous. Americans use too much water to irrigate agricultural land. It takes up to 86% of all water. Moreover, a third is used for products that people do not even eat: cattle feed. After all, Americans eat 4 times more beef than the world average. And the starting point for the disaster was a deliberate mistake 100 years ago. When the western states signed the Colorado River Compact in the early 20th century, its water resources were overestimated. Although a special scientific expedition warned that it was impossible to rely on the volume of water prescribed in the contract, it is based on the most optimistic estimates in years with the highest level of precipitation. Nevertheless, the compact continues to operate. Each state continues to choose its own water rate, and the Colorado River continues to dry up. If this continues further, then the western states of the United States may face the same fate as the Aral Sea and Saudi Arabia, although we believe that this can be avoided. If developing agriculture in drylands is so dangerous in the long run, why are we still doing it? Why are mistakes leading to global catastrophes becoming the norm? Perhaps it is high time that we take a different approach and understand that water supplies, in the face of global warming, need to be treated more responsibly. If we do not start using the resources of the planet allotted to us wisely, then sooner or later our mistakes will lead to a catastrophe on a planetary scale. And it may be too late. Therefore, we have to start changing the situation right now.